Many people regard you as a personification of Ubuntu. What do you understand Ubuntu to be?
In the old days when we were young, a traveler through a country would stop at a village and he didn't have to ask for food or for water. Once he stops, the people give him food, entertain him. That is one aspect of Ubuntu, but it will have various aspects. Ubuntu does not mean that people should not enrich themselves. The question, therefore, is, are you going to do so in order to enable the community around you to be able to improve? These are the important things in life. And if one can do that, you have done something very important which will be appreciated.
The open source report on the 20th of April 2019 from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. As we normally do, we partner with Cranston Software, and for this broadcast, Cranston Analytics. Now, our methodology here, this part of the broadcast will be on the open source report, and this is volume 1 of the Mueller report we'll be talking about, and also we'll have it on Boston Red. That is our political channel. And I'm debating now whether or not we'll provide some more information for people that are not interested in the technical part. But we'll start with the kernel, as we normally do, the Linux kernel, where we are. The latest stable version is 5.0.9. This is from the Linux kernel archives. And I believe on one edition we're running, which is Ubuntu, we have, let me see, what do we have? We have 0.8. Now on our Slackware, which is our main server, we now have, where are we? 4.19.35 or 36. We upgraded the latest one. All of those kernels are adequate as far as your security is concerned. There is, when you go to 5.0.0, there's a difference in the drivers, and we won't go into what the kernels are. We'll just start it out as such. And we'll be talking about encryption here. Get to the right pointer. And WikiLeaks in particular, what they were able to do, what the CIA was able to do, their PGP key, and what it was all about, and pretty good privacy. We'll talk a little bit about it. But firstly, let's go to the Mueller report, and I'll just scan over it. We're not obviously going to go to the entire 400 and plus pages of it. But we'll look at the structure of the Internet Research Agency. They come up, that is a Russian-controlled agency. They operated through Facebook. You probably heard about that. Through Twitter accounts, individual accounts. Used botnets, the whole 9 yards. And this was in the 2016 campaign. And there is a section here. And hold on just a minute. Okay, we're back. There is a section here on the Russian hacking, and dumping operation. That's the GRU's hacking directed at the Clinton campaign, how they targeted her server, and I'm not sure why we're getting this. But anyway, let's get back to our PDF here, and hopefully we can do it the other way. Alright. Anyway, intrusions into this is the Democratic Committee, Democratic National Committee Network's initial access. I'm just reading from the table of authorities here. Implementation of malware and their network and FAPUB documents there, and we'll talk about a little bit about DC leaks and Lucifer 2.0. The use of WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks expressed opposition towards the Clinton campaign, and contacts here. Now, the contacts are things that have not been proven. Period. And other cyber operations here, intrusions. We'll talk more about those. Some of this, there's some redactions in it, but we'll get to a little bit of the background here and the Poindexter emails that pop up here. So let's move on here. Hopefully we can move on here. And we're moving towards this, and we're just skimming it on now. There is volume 2. We will not get into it in this broadcast. We have divided up our particular situation. Now, this is the introduction here. The report was submitted to the Attorney General pursuant to 28 CFR. The Russian government interfered in the 2016 election in sweeping and systematic fashion. Evidence of Russian government operations began to surface in mid-2016. In June, the Democratic National Committee and its cyber response team publicly announced that hackers had compromised its computer network. Now, that's at the DNC. And this is a WikiLeaks part, is what we're more interested in. Soon after, that was in July, WikiLeaks released documents. A foreign government contacted the FBI about the encounter with the Trump's campaign foreign policy advisor. We won't get into what Papadopoulos did here. This is the beyond. This will be in the second part, and where Mueller took up the case. And let me just move along here. I'm doing this live, so a little different here. The Russian Research Agency carried out their Russian interference operation identified by investigations social media campaign. Now, this is not unusual. Those have been done before. They were done in the Ukraine by various actors there. And what we want to do here, we'll append this report, so we're not going over the entire report at all. Immediately after the election, the government and officials in the Russian Federation tried to make inroads into new administration. We're not going to get into what inroads they did or did not make in the new administration, nor some of the Russian actors here that participated. We're not really interested in that. And you'll see a lot of redactions going on here in this part. About a third of the entire report is redacted. Now, to the Clinton campaign and some of what had started there. Now, these were some of the we used to call front groups that were out there being patriotic, stop all immigrants, secure the borders, Tea Party News, reported to African American social media groups, Black Matters, Black activists, and Don't Shoot Us, and to the GBTQ community, GBQ United. Some of these are fairly simplistic, period, and you get into a lot of that. Nothing new there. It's happened before, but probably not at the scale. But again, we're dealing with social media. What we'll be dealing with in our report here is the Clinton survey. And we've done a program on it to re-sum it up. The Clinton survey basically was what we call a mail fetching operation, because there was an ISP involved in this, and the The mail basically was fetched or delivered from the ISP to Clinton's server, which was in the basement. Yes, it was secured physically by the Secret Service. But as far as certificates, etc., were concerned, all the certificates were out of date, and it was a Windows server, as far as we know, which is very difficult to secure in the first place. Now, did they use the Windows mail client? I think they did. There's various renditions of it. Those of us that work in the Linux world, a little different situation there. But evidently they did, and they were able to merge accounts together, basically from AOL, and there was a Hillary at the Clinton server.com, I believe is what it was called. It may have been called the Hillary Clinton .com as the domain name. It really doesn't matter very much there, but that was what they used, and I'm assuming they used for email Outlook, but they were using several devices. There they had the Apple. There was an iPhone available there, and at one time they had what most politicians at the time, BlackBerry. That mail could also be forwarded to the ISP, or fetched to the ISP, and then on to the server. So all these emails were there, and she used the emails for personal business, such as planning weddings, etc., on the server, I should say, and also for some types of business, as she was the Secretary of State at the time. Now, the State Department does have secure email, and they did not find any email on her server that was classified as secret. And again, you're getting into several classifications there, a little bit beyond and what we are getting into here. Here we're going to basically spend most of our time with WikiLeaks, and where WikiLeaks was and what kind of encryption Julian Assange. Now you got to remember, Julian Assange was in the Ecuadorian embassy. He did have access there, and he was using some of these devices that we'll get into on his connection, but you have to understand that he is using the Ecuadorian embassy's email or internet access, whatever, .com, .org, or whatever it was, and they literally had security personnel on post. They were in a room virtually next to his, so they could monitor his email incoming and outgoing, no doubt about that. Now, we'll talk about his use of Tor and some of these other devices here, and WikiLeaks itself had exposed some tools the CIA had that supposedly that could get around some of the encryption. We understand from some of the cyber experts that when you use Tor, actually this is an NSA, whether or not they can break into the virtual private connection there, but they do know that you're using a Tor. And many of these tools we'll be talking about in a minute here are used by journalists in countries where they do not want the government to see what they are transmitting. Now, the question is, there are a lot of private security organizations around the world, and they make their dollars off of supposedly providing workarounds or the ability to get around some of these. Let me just move along here very, very quickly. And this is where we get into a lot of redactions here with WikiLeaks, and according to Gates, last summer the Trump plan campaign was planning a press strategy, a communication strategy based upon releases of the Clinton emails. Was a big deal there. And of course the Clinton emails supposedly came from WikiLeaks. Now, how did WikiLeaks get the emails? WikiLeaks said that they did not get the emails from Guccifer 2. They were from someone inside the Clinton campaign. Now, and some of this is for local consumption, so we won't be spreading things around here that are just simply not factually correct. You need to understand you're dealing with intelligence agencies here, and because you are dealing with intelligence agencies, all kinds of spins go on. Now, the Trump campaign expressed interest in Hillary Clinton's private email server, where approximately 30,000 emails from that server had in fact been permanently destroyed, as reported by the media. And a lot of that is the server. It's the physical server itself changed. Internet providers changed, and that was some of the problem that they had. There is a way of forensically recreating things, and we don't know. And we won't get into some of the personalities here. They're really not necessary to get into, but understanding what actually occurred here and how this information was accessed by, we'll say, X. Because from this mic, we're not certain that the Russian Federation was actually the actor here, and that in itself is a lot of debate going on out there. Who supplied the information to WikiLeaks? We may never know, is what the question is there. This is the U.S. government's spin. There are other spins out there, and you, of course, can find some of those spins, and we're just trying to get to where we are going here. Let me just move along here a little bit. I'm actually reading from the actual report. And we're up to 179 right now. This is in volume 1 of the report. Now, we will not go to volume 2. A lot of redactions here, and we're only covering, we're not getting into Paul Manafort, what Paul Manafort did or did not do, the actual Clinton people, period. But we are getting into what happened with WikiLeaks as best as we can piece it together. And incidentally, since this has occurred, Julian Assange is in a prison in London. He was literally seized from the Ecuadorian embassy when they took away his citizenship and fed him to the wolves, so to speak. Now, the big question is here, what actually happened? And that is the big problem that we have to look at, and what happened there to Julian Assange when he was in the embassy, and how much privacy he had. We do know that his conversations with various people, including his lawyers, were recorded. He had to use a radio to drown out some of that. And would some of the WikiLeaks people, like Julian Assange, that's obviously understands privacy and its boundaries, would he allow a tool to be used that WikiLeaks itself had said that was not secure? Would the messages be passed on to individuals? That is the method used by Bin Laden and company. They would actually pass on messages by couriers, whether it be sticks or not, but not across a network. They did not do that. And that would be taken by some trusted individual to a point, and it would be then accessed on a computer that was not related to any network at all. That's how they did it. And there were all kinds of problems out there with tracking devices, etc. We won't go in to those, but we thought we would, and we won't get into volume 2. That is past us. But at one time, DJ Trump did call out WikiLeaks and told them to keep up the so-called good work. What we'll do now is we'll go to WikiLeaks itself and look at some of the problems with this whole line of encryption. Now, I'm just looking now at the WikiLeaks site itself. Now, WikiLeaks had several, and if you go to their site, and we'll put a link to it, the U.S. Embassy shopping list. This is published on 21 December 2018. They published a searchable database of more than 18,000 of the procurement requests posted by the U.S. embassies around the world. They also published the searchable, the Hillary Clinton email archives. And this goes back there as to what they were able to do. Now, we look at the WikiLeaks PGP key. There was a key out there. Now we're looking at, read it here. Anyway, the WikiLeaks key. Do not WikiLeaks do not use the PGP to contact. We found that people using it were in a dangerous manner. Further, one of WikiLeaks keys on a server key is a fake. Someone with little knowledge in the subject, how could a PGP key be used in a dangerous manner? With this out of the question, what is your next preference method of proof of life? Anyway, they put some random thoughts here. This is from someone writing here. I'm not sure who it was. We know that WikiLeaks hasn't signed anything with a key since mid-October. And on the WikiLeaks its submission page, a link is here that they post a PGP public key. You have, incidentally, public and private key. We'll get around to that. This means if anybody's submitting something to their submission page encrypted with the public key, the submission would remain encrypted unless WikiLeaks provided the private key was compromised. It would be very difficult to open the submitted file. If WikiLeaks IT structure web/Twitter was compromised, the new owner would still be unable to accept submissions, but not unable to open them without the private key. And these are just some comments here, and we'll, incidentally, if people have comments on this, please leave them at bostonred.org. We'd like to know about it, or on the Cranston Software Twitter feed. You can find us on Twitter at Cranston Software. Anyway, if you go to Wiki, this is another comment here. These are 2 years ago anyway, and click. It will tell you that submitting submissions using the PGP key, which is given to you, then the actual wiki part of posting. It says that the exact opposite. We think there's what is allowed and what is not allowed. We thought we'd pick these comments up, and this is WikiLeaks PGP keys. Now, they use a number of different operations here. The WikiLeaks research community, they use Tor, T-O-R. They use also Tails. Now, you can get that on a disk. We use it here. And Courage. The Courage Foundation is an international organization that supports those who risk their lives or a liberty to make significant contributions to the historic record. And there's also Bitcom here, uses a peer-to-peer network. They're just mentioning some of various things that contribute here to security. And we encourage you to use Tor. We also encourage you to use Tails. Now, this pretty good privacy is an encrypted program that provides a cryptographic privacy and authentication for data communications. It's used for signing, encrypting, and decrypting text, emails, files, directories, etc. The PGP and similar software follow the open PGP standard, and we use it on our servers. Now, the hash data compression, symmetric cryptography, and the public key cryptography. Each step uses several supported algorithms. Now, big debate there about these, but anyway, the fingerprint, a public key, is a shorter version of a public key. From the fingerprint, someone can get the right to correspond there. Compatibility evolved in various editions, no doubt about that. Digital signatures, it supports message authentication and integrity checking. The latest is based to detect whether a message has been altered since it was completed. Certificates. The more recently open PGP specification, trusted signatures can be used to support creation of certificates of authority. The Clinton server had none of this. The PGP versions always include a way to cancel or revoke identity certificates. Security quality. This is from Wikipedia, incidentally. To the best of public available information, there is no known method which will allow a person or group to break the encryption by cryptographers or computational means. Indeed, in 1995, cryptographer Bruce Skimmer characterized an earlier version as being the closest you are likely to get to military-grade encryption. You'll hear that word bantered around, military-grade encryption, and also military-grade programs that you can use to wipe your drive with. The original version, the RSA algorithm, was used to encrypt session keys. RSA is a security dependent upon one-way functions and the nature of mathematic integer factoring. Similarly, the symmetric key algorithm, and this is would be PGP Volume 2. And the newer versions are released periodically, and you have to be up to date. Most important situation there. And let's see, rubber hose encrypt analysis are black bag encrypt analysis. There are Trojan horses, keyloggers. Evidently, keyloggers were busy on Julian Assange's computer. We're assuming that Julian Assange used Linux on his computer. Don't know right now. Hasn't come out yet. And a lot of this is a bit early, so we're not going to spend time on the earlier parts of it. People have been pushing, of course, this open PGP standard. And it has been around, I'm looking at it here, 2014. The Free Software Foundation has developed its own open PGP compliant program called the GNU Privacy Guard. That's its abbreviation. We've used it and would trust them. It's under the GNU public license. There's several IO and Android open PGP components out there. Now let's go back here. Can the CIA crack Signal, and what app encryption no matter what. Now this was in 2017. Won't go into it. We'll try to stick these are 2017 stories. We'll hit 10 things you need to know. This is from Hackers News about it, and they are a responsible source. Vault 7 is the first part of the series, Year Zero, that WikiLeaks will be releasing in the coming days. Now, the date on this was March of 2017, according to whistleblower organization. The CIA did not inform companies about the security issue of their products, and other documents out here exposed the CIA mobile hacking secrets. Vault 7, they called it, was 8,761 documents. The CIA did not breach encrypted apps, instead of bypass them. Made phone malware could read the private chats without breaking the encryption. That says Vault 7 here. CIA borrowed code from public malware samples and the CIA, NSA. A lot of these characters are out here, and they continue to be out here. They are not, as they say, went out of business. That's one thing to remember. Hackers News is a good source to look at. There's several others around that could be the types of sources you would be looking to, and I'm just seeing if they have a search engine in here. They do, and we'll just put in this while we roll along here. The one takeaway that we want you to be aware of, there is no such thing as a foolproof system, depending obviously on what you need to do. Now, I'm not sure. We were just looking at some things from Hackers News, but again, you always have to be very, very time sensitive here as to what is moving along, and this is not going to answer what we're doing here. And we're looking around here. Let me just do one other thing here. I may need to cut away to now, this is 2019 PGP encryption overview, what it is. This is from the AT&T people here, and this is the latest software, what it is, and how it works. Here, this is their blog, and again, pretty good privacy is, you may have heard of before. Most generic guides simply explain it as a high level, are how to encrypt and decrypt messages. More concise guide, we'll discuss the following: PGP, OpenPGP, and GPG, and that will cover most of what we here. Is a protocol used for encrypting and decrypting. We know that. There are different variants of it. Open PGP and GPG is one of those out. And these have been out over 20 years. 1991 when he got it out there. And we'll append this page. Confidentiality, integrity, and availability. In terms of information security, we primarily examine how confidentiality and integrity is integrated into PGP. These terms are derived from corporate security models are dubbed as CIA. This is confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Anyway, confidentiality, ensuring the confidentiality of information. Integrity, ensuring that the legitimacy and completeness of the message. And available, PGP ensures availability by providing global scalable public keys, and also available with short and long IDs. Encryption versus signing. There's more overlapping between confidentiality and integrity. By encrypting a message or a file, we increase levels of confidentiality, and by signing, we increase levels of integrity. And to encrypt a file, we talked about that. Decrypt a file. Web trust. Theoretically important parts of the design is web trust, a cryptographic concept used to establish how trusted a key pair is through decentralized communications and connections. Simple explanation there. And there's some diagrams here. We'll just put this in. We won't get into that. File signing, how you sign a file. 15 reasons not to use PGP. Secure Share published article, 15 reasons not to use it. Misuse. A party may use PGP wrong or respond to an encrypted email in plain text. The open PGP format is notable during the packet analysis and security efforts, i.e. government dragnets. Transition metadata. Transitional metadata reveals context and parties involved in the conversation, i.e. email address, and subject matter, and size. No forward secrecy, long and risks and long-term keys being a compromise. Is hard even impractical to use short-term keys. Let me get back to the cracking of it. Very, very important there. Cryptography is crackable. Parties may store encrypted messages and could hypothetically start decrypting messages once the technology advances enough to do so, i.e. using quantum computing for cracking RSA cryptography. Encrypted messages may be collected and stored via dragnet surveillance to be cracked into future overexposure. Using surveillance services networks that will draw attention out to PGP usage, especially on a centralized cloud-hosted service that participates in surveillance. Now, many of these do. 7. Discover Web of Trust. Web Trust is a publicly available information and can be analyzed for investigative purposes, and it doesn't scale well globally. PGP, non-reputational and authentication. If a message is signed, we only know the sender's private key was used to sign the message. It's possible that the sender's key could be compromised and used by third-party spies or espionage. Any plausible deniability writing of this, and by signing a message, we sacrifice any plausible deniability. Message size analysis. We can guess at the size of the message based on the encrypted link. Workflow messaging is impractical. PGP is used for one-on-one communications. Now, all this would apply particularly to Julian Assange's situation being in the embassy. Now, targeted attacks against a PGP key ID. Adversaries could generate a PGP key with a matching a short ID key or long key. The shorter key could be used for impersonation. I got nothing to hide. People may not want to use a PGP simply because they have nothing to hide. This is worth consideration, but it's an invalid excuse. The public exchange. To use PGP, a public key must be shared. We must exchange public keys and privately in a contextually safe manner. Now, PGP attack vectors, and they lay out some here. Let's briefly run through some of the adversary's potential capabilities. Could steal the sender's private key and decrypt messages. An adversary could steal the received private key and decrypt it. An adversary could intercept PGP encrypted messages stolen. Then, an adversary could intercept an email with the sender's plain text public key and replace the public key. And this is evidently what they did with WikiLeaks. Threat modeling, an operational conscious individual. We should, as individuals, plural, we take time to understand the risks and threats associated with confidentiality. A threat model, also referred to as a risk model, is essentially a structure of a representation that the information affects the security of the operation. Understand the operational context, etc. And we'll finish this up. About the cryptographer is an aspiring IT professional. We don't know who the cryptographer is, but you can look at the post and find Mr. Cryptographer. Nonetheless, this was in January of 24 for 2019. And we'll put it out here on our Twitter feed. This is the Cranston Software Twitter feed. We'll make sure everybody has it there. And we'll get it up on Facebook in a minute. We only have two hands, I guess, going here. So we'll try to get it out to the people as something that they can look at and study this. Particularly if most people aren't in the situation where they're living literally next door to the CIA, the Ecuadorian embassy, etc. So that in itself is a little bit different. AlienVault.com is where this particular situation is hosted. And let's go on here a little bit. And what else can we find? I guess basically, other than Julian Assange and his predicament there, not a very good predicament to be living in. Let me just jump over here a minute and get a little bit into the Ecuadorian embassy here. We don't need to look at this report again because basically it is one of those things we just don't need to deal. But because of the harassment that he faced when he was housed in the for 7 years there, a very long time to be there, and not the best situation for one to be in. This is more on Julian Assange and his predicament here. And Dan Lelsberg, which you can find on our Boston Red Twitter feed, he is there, and he's talking about what happened in his particular day, a different day, but he was not living in an embassy. Imagine living in an embassy in a room, and the room was right next to him. And there's I'm just looking at something here that as we look around the web, without having to stop this particular situation here, how he's been arrested and even the poor man's a cat. This is a problem of journalism in a particular here, and this is the big problem here with pretty good encryption and where it goes, period. Every journalist in the world should be speaking out for Julian Assange. That's why we're doing the program in two different parts, and the Pew as a endangered species journalism. And we also remember here while we're doing the program, what was her name? Leader McKee. She was killed by a stray bullet in Londonderry, that is in Northern Ireland there. So let me just go back here and see if we can find. There's also some journalistic tools here to be used, and I didn't have it up ahead of time. Apologize for that. No. Let me briefly move away from this and talk just a little bit here about artificial intelligence in Kenya. They are there, and Google has opened its first AI intelligence laboratory in Kenya. And internet, incidentally, is used in various emerging countries, particularly on the African continent, much more so. And they have a case here against a farmer using TensorFlow that is part of Google's artificial intelligence. So they are applying that for people, and this is from Q13 Fox. The benefits of AI, of course, in health, education, etc. And they're talking to an individual here that is in that particular business. AI fundamentally works based on the idea that is fed into it. There's no doubt about that, and that is a big problem there. AI works because a lot of personal data is fed into it. This is back to talking about privacy. Aims to build trust. This is between Google, the people who created the technology, and the end users. Well, it's basically the same thing with privacy and encryption, and we try to relate things together. And this is Google, and Google moving into different areas, and they have some ethics there, but again, these ethics are a little bit different than we would think. 100,000 developers and over 60 startups gain experience and skills through a Google program, Google Launchpad Accelerated Program in Africa. Google estimates that 35% of the Africans have access to the web, compared to 48% in Asia and 67% in the Latin America. They call it 85 in Europe and 95 in North America. Many internet users in Africa don't have Wi-Fi in their homes, no doubt about that, but it's more of a public street corner situation. They have teamed up with 21st Century, one of the largest fiber network providers. It's in Nigeria, to create a stable access across the continent. Now, what they do have there is a low RAM smartphones. One of the methods of achieving this is through TensorFlow. We've talked about that at Google development conferences. TensorFlow is the creation of an app that lets farmers upload pictures of their crops and get advice back on the health of their plants and ways to increase productivity. I've used that for my prophetic plants here. Let me just do one other thing here. We'll take a break here, and I need to locate this. WBRN Radio. Okay, we returned, and I have this information. This is for journalists, but anyone could benefit from its use. This is called a Secure Drop, a journalist guide here. Secure Drop wants your feedback. Confused by something in our documentary, let us know. The guide presents an overview of Secure Drop, a system for journalists. It covers core functions, update your workstation, keep Secure Drop updated. And we'll put this on here. This is a program. Create a GPG key. Journalists need a personal key for encrypting files. A GP key has two parts, and we've talked about this before. The private key used for decryption stays on the workstation. The public key used for encryption is copied to SecureView's workstation. And these are some, again, of it. We talked about GNU Linux and Windows and iOS. I'd encourage you not to use Windows unless you just have to. Journalists viewing documents on a Secure Drop must connect to the journalist interface using a Tails operating system on a USB drive. Now, the Tails OS makes using Secure Drop very difficult for from other computer experiences. Journalists have an authenticated Tor hidden service from logging in there, and Tor. This will open a Tor Onion page, and it's access to it here. And we do encourage journalists to use it. And it's very out here moving documents to SecureView workstation. We have one of these established incidentally for our work. Secure Drop is the journalist's guide, is securedrop.org. We will place this on the show page, which is used basically as our show notes. Now, part 2 of this presentation will be on Boston Red, our political part. We'll talk about volume 2 of the Mueller report. This particular one did focus on technical aspects of not only the Clinton server, but primarily of WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, his stay in the Ecuadorian embassy, the type of security there. In fact, Ecuador said it spent over $5 million to provide him, quote unquote, with security. The whole place was bugged, it was monitored, and he was virtually a prisoner there. He was provided a private room which he had shower facilities, etc. But at the same time, it had internet access. They did limit his internet access. And I think the last few months they actually just took the whole thing away. But people would come in and they would bring in mobile devices, and he would use those. But again, that is no indication that he was not under constant surveillance. And the reason that we spotlight on him was some of the WikiLeaks operations. Now, don't be fooled into Julian Assange was not operating the main WikiLeaks operation. That was elsewhere. He was just communicating with people, and I would assume that any high-level discussions were done person to person, not peer to peer. So that's a different situation. So the ultimate takeaway here is, if you have deep, dark secrets, use something like Secure Drop if you're a journalist. But you have to watch out. Now, in certain instances where there are internet cafes, in North America here, we have literally hundreds of access points you can go to, and you're very, very careful about what device you can use. But again, smartphones are very inexpensive. So-called burner phones, you can get those, and you then could put on VPNs and secure software, etc., and communicate by using different places at different times. Now, remember, there's also in every device what's called a MAC address, and this is why you would use the burner phone, but you would probably only use it several times. Now, if you use a notebook, you could do that, or you could use someone else's notebook and move from wireless access point to access point. Many retail stores, etc., they have Wi-Fi. So you use any of those. And you could use various keys, public keys, the long or the short, and you could change those depending obviously on how much traffic you have. If you don't have a lot of traffic, you can change that key every few months if you wish. You can change it every day, but you wouldn't do that. But there are ways of doing that. And just remember, deep dark secrets are more personal. Obviously, if you're operating in some country and need to communicate from that country with someone else in a different country, and that's what we're talking about when we're talking about these workstations being put up. You go with something like Tails that you can keep on the sticks, and sticks are inexpensive these days. We can go back to the old DVD. We encourage you to do all of those. Anyway, this will end this part of our report, and you'll hear this not only on this channel, but you will hear it eventually on Boston Red. This is M.A. at Cranston. Have a good weekend, and a good, for those in some countries, wherever they are, good Easter holiday there. Take care. Good day.